Back on November 30th, 1948, on a crisp, cool night, a husband and wife was out enjoying their routine walk on the beautiful sands of Somerton Beach, Australia, when they came across a smartly dressed man who was lying on his back, facing the sea, his head and shoulders propped up against the seawall. As the couple got closer, roughly 15 to 20 yards away, they could not see the man's face, but noticed his right arm moved upwards, then fell down. Assuming he was drunk and needed to sleep it off, the couple continued on with their night. About 30 minutes later, another couple would see the man in the same place, but just as the first, the couple went on about their night, leaving the man undisturbed. The following morning, the husband, who first spotted the man on the beach the night prior, went for his early morning swim around 6:30 a.m. Afterwards, he met with one of his friends and noticed some men on horses staring at the same location he had spotted the man's body the night prior. As the husband walked over to the two trainee jockeys, he told them he had seen this body the previous night. As they got closer, it became apparent that this man, whose eyes were stuck open staring into the ocean, was not alive, almost as if he was frozen in time. The man immediately went back and alerted the authorities. When police arrived, the 5'11", 40 to 50-year-old man was alone, with no identification or money on him. His head was tilted to the right, and between his right cheek and the right lapel of his coat, there lay a partially smoked cigarette. Remarkably, the coat remained unscorched, and the cheek showed no signs of blistering. His right arm was doubled over, palms upward, and his left arm just laying on the sand alongside his body. All he had tucked in his pockets were hair combs, matches, cigarettes, a pack of chewing gum, but what's strange is that there was also a used bus ticket and an unused train ticket, as if the man had intentions to ride off on a train somewhere. Weirdly enough though, all of the tags on his clothing had been meticulously removed. Police thought the cause of death was heart failure or possibly poisoning, and they would be right about one of those theories. The autopsy revealed that the man probably died of poison, but the type of poison and how it was consumed could not be determined. There were also no signs of violence and nothing to suggest foul play. But 3 medical witnesses concluded that his death was, quote, not natural, meaning they could not figure out if he took his own life or if someone else did. But with most certainty, they believed his death was, quote, not accidental. The doctor who examined the body placed the man's time of death around 2 a.m. on December 1st of 1948, so just a few hours after the two couples originally spotted him on the beach. Now the next question was, who is this man? The fingerprints that the police took were unidentifiable, and further efforts from police led them to taking a picture of the now proclaimed Somerton Man and plastering his face all over the newspaper. Yet not one person came forward to identify him. A month went by and the police found a suitcase at the Adelaide railway station who believed belonged to this mysterious man. Amongst many items in the suitcase, there was assorted attire with tags labeled in the name of T. Keene. Investigators brought in a tailor to inspect the clothing, and it was determined that the items were made in the United States, concluding the man may have not been from the area. 4 months went on with no traction on identifying this man, but authorities would end up finding a clue hidden in a secret pocket that was sewn inside the man's trousers. It was a tiny scrap of paper appeared to be torn from a book with the Persian phrase "tamam sood," meaning it is finished. It was pretty clear to authorities that this piece of paper wasn't just from any book, but must have came from a book called Rubaiyat, which was a collection of 4-line poems attributed to the Persian poet Omar Khayyam. Now, the poems often explored themes of love, fate, and the transient nature of life, basically reflecting on how short life is and all these emotions and pleasures we endure in life should be appreciated while it lasts. After months of looking for the exact book that had a missing part of a page in it, the police really had no choice but to take a plastered cast of the man and embalm the body to preserve the unidentified Somerton Man. 8 months now goes by, and it's now August of the following year, 1949, and the police are seeming to have a normal day of work down at Somerton Beach, when a man walks into the police station claiming just after the Somerton Man was found, he found a copy of a rare edition book called the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam in his car he would park near the beach. At the time of finding this book in his car, he did not think much of it until he read about the search for this book in a newspaper article. Sure enough, the book had a part of the final page torn out, and it just so happened to match the piece of paper found in the Somerton Man's trousers. The book contained a phone number and a mysterious code that has never been deciphered. When authorities started to investigate the phone number, it led them to a woman named Jessica Thompson, who was a nurse that lived nearby. When she interviewed with police, her behavior was rather evasive. In other words, it was like she was trying to avoid the situation she was in, not making eye contact with police, turning her body away as she continued to fidget. Although she denied knowing the man, the police took Jessica to see the plastered bust of the Somerton Man with the hopes it would jog her memory. But when presented with the bust, she nearly fainted. From there, the case went cold with no new information, no new leads, no one coming forward to identify this mysterious man. Due to the Cold War climate of the time, there was this theory going around that this man may have been a Russian spy or maybe a professional ballet dancer due to the coroner's statements of his well-developed calf muscles. Speculation and increasingly outlandish theories dominated the public's thoughts for many decades. After 70 years, this mysterious Somerton Man's identity was finally discovered. The case of the Somerton Man is just so bizarre to me. Like, you have this man who appeared to literally be washed up to shore, or even more weird, like meticulously placed up against the sea wall. And even when medical examiners were trying to figure out his cause of death, there was this back and forth of what poison was it. Maybe a certain type that with minimal doses could have caused the death, but then traces of it were eliminated from the body before death. But even minimal doses could not have caused the death so quickly. And a higher dose would definitely leave traces behind. Then there's this massive wondering of who is this man? And the note found in a secret hidden pocket of his trousers, Tamam Su, it is finished. Was this a self-inflicted end-of-life clue or a final goodbye to a lover? There's so many questions about this case, but finally, after 70 years, the Somerton Man's identity was finally cracked open. Two researchers, Professor Derek Abbott, who is an expert in physics and also an electronic engineer at the University of Adelaide in Australia, and Dr. Colleen Fitzgerald, a genealogist specialized in using DNA to help solve cold cases, cracked the mystery on who the Somerton Man was. Using hairs caught in the face cast, Derek and Colleen were able to plug in the Somerton Man's DNA into a genealogical research database called GEDmatch. Now, this online service made headway in the media back in 2018 when investigators used it to identify a suspect in the Golden State Killer case in California. It is also used for people to find relatives and build a family tree, so definitely a useful site professionally and personally. Now, when the Somerton Man's hair was plugged into GEDmatch, it yielded 2 million DNA markers, each serving as a distinct code capturing a person's individual traits. They would finally, after several decades, find a match to a distant cousin. At this point, researchers were able to put together a family tree of around 4,000 people. They eagerly dove into archival records to find individuals whose life story closely mirrored what was known about the Somerton Man. This is when they discovered a man named Carl Webb, who was born in Victoria, Australia in 1905. Now, how were they able to find this connection? Well, amongst the vast array of DNA relatives, they managed to link one to Carl's father and another to Carl's mother. They did mention that it could really have been any of Carl's siblings, but Carl was the only one with no documented death, which makes sense since no one could identify his body up until now. In order to determine whether Carl is the Somerton Man, they delved into the maternal family lineage to identify any living individuals who could provide a DNA sample. Due to archival evidence supporting the identification of Carl Webb to the Somerton Man, it was found that Carl was born on November 16th of 1905. He was the sixth child of a German-born man and an Australian woman. And growing up, Carl and his siblings would work in the family bakery business in Springvale, Victoria, Australia. Once the bakery closed, he would go on to become an instrument maker, and in 1941, when he turned 35, he got married to 21-year-old Dorothy Jean Robertson, who was a pharmacist and a foot specialist. The couple would move to an apartment on Brombay Street in South Yarra, and according to records, Carl enjoyed poetry, writing, and horse race betting. He did have a sister living in Melbourne who was married to a man named Thomas Keane, which could be the same T. Keane associated with the clothing found in the Somerton Man's suitcase. 74 years later, the Webb family did not know about their connection to the Somerton Man, but there were stories of a missing family member many years before. After contacting who they believed was the Somerton Man's great-nephew, whose name is Stuart, they were able to dig through photo albums that Stuart's late grandparents had in a back room. Pretty quickly, they were able to identify a family group photo that Carl was possibly in, but they didn't know which one was Carl until a week later when they found another photo that had handwritten names on it. Grandpa, Grandma, Roy, and Charlie. At this point, Stuart went back to the larger family photo and was able to identify Carl on the back row. He was also identified in a 1921 photo of the under-16 Swinburne Technical College football team. And to further confirm this link of Carl to the Webb family, they asked Stuart's sister to do a saliva test in which she agreed her DNA would be found to be, quote, right in the middle of the range of a DNA match to Carl, basically confirming that Stuart's sister was Carl's great-great-niece. For Stuart and his sister, they described this discovery of their family's connection to the Somerton Man, quote, bittersweet. Because on one end, it was happiness they found out who this person was in their family, but also sadness about this forgotten family member. Stuart even stated, quote, this was a person. He wasn't just a media hot for a little while in an unsolved mystery. He was our family. End quote. Now, the last historical record of Carl dates back to April of 1947 when he left his wife. But get this, 3 years after his death, his wife Dorothy placed a notice in the paper stating she'd begun divorce proceedings against Carl because of desertion. So let's recap real quick. 1947, he leaves his wife. The Somerton Man's body was found on the beach the following year in 1948. Then 3 years later, in 1951, his wife starts a divorce due to him basically abandoning her. She presumed that Carl was maybe lying dead in Adeline Cemetery somewhere, basically not painting a so flattering picture of him. In the divorce papers, Dorothy described Carl as being violent, threatening, and moody, one who was often in bed by 7 p.m. and had, quote, no particular friends of his own. Even more dark, Carl would allegedly write poems of his greatest desires about death, which, if you think about it, makes sense as to why he would have a piece of paper with the English translation of "it is finished" on him. Dorothy would also come home to find her husband lying in a wet bed, gazing at the ceiling, barely being able to speak. In the days following this overdose, Dorothy helped nurse Carl back to health, where she literally was hand-feeding him. And despite Dorothy's care to help her husband get better, Carl called his wife a fool and became more violent. Then in September of 1946, Dorothy left their apartment but still stayed married to Carl. Then the following year in 1947, Carl moved out. Now, experts claim that Carl may have been on his way back to finding his wife after he left because she would move 89 miles from Melbourne to Butte, but they can't say for certain this was the reason. And now, because of this new information of who Carl was and his link to being the Somerton Man, the theories of him being a Russian spy diminished, and questions of whether Carl took his own life began to rise to the occasion. But since we don't know for certain, the mystery continues as to what truly occurred on the night of December 30th of 1948, and perhaps we may never find out.